talk about AI, shall we? Because I don't think that you can get away with running a show, a podcast, even about open source without talking at least a little bit about artificial intelligence. We do have an open source AI definition that was rolled out by the Open Source Initiative throughout a long process of talking to experts in the open source and AI ecosystem to make sure that people have a good understanding of the space and what an open source AI definition could and should be. The 1.0 version is already available, and now the Open Source Initiative, as well as the bigger open source ecosystem, is looking into one particular aspect as a next step, which is data. Because, as you all know, not all data can be shared publicly. We talk about people's private and sensitive information. It is not something that you can and should share as part of an AI model. So when it comes to AI, the definition of what it means when we say open source AI is a little bit different than for things like software or documentation. So that one is already very challenging. And so data is one thing. And then there's another thing that we already brought up in different contexts a little bit on season 2, which is copyright. It was, I think, Stephen Wally at the beginning of the season who talked about how copyright is already a stretch to apply to software because software by design is continuously changing. When it comes to copyright, it doesn't really do well with things that are continuously changing. So again, applying it to software is a little bit of a stretch. One would say a little bit too much of a stretch, but it happened anyway. Can we stretch it further for AI? Or is it the time to come up with something else? And so I have a segment for you here from our conversation with Ria Farrell Schalnat about AI and copyright and what could or should come in that space.
As you've gone through that in the previous iteration of a technology evolution, as you look at AI and models and you look forward 20 to 30 years, do you think we'll make the same statement that, gee, when this thing came out, we should have come up with some other regime than trying to shove patents and copyright law into how to actually manage models and what those look like going forward? I mean, I see very similar aspects to where we are with AI, as far as just the systems that are in place don't really fit well with what a model is and how it's constructed and how it's used.
Oh, I agree.
If you prognosticate going forward, do you see the same kind of analogy?
Yes, I think there's definitely lots of different camps that all have their own ideas about how to protect AI or whether it should even be protected. And it's even more nuanced and complicated than just open source, because you've got software that runs AI, you've got the models, you've got the training data, and you also have the weights that are these matrices of numbers and statistics that also don't fit into any area of IP very easily. So you put all 4 of those together and you're balancing a lot of different components. And then on top of that, you have new licensing that is coming out right now, and that is trying to capture one or more aspects of what AI is. There's even fierce debates going on over what the open artificial intelligence definition should be in the open source initiative that I've been following, as that has been evolving over the last year. And I know there's lots of different camps with different opinions about where things should fall in open versus proprietary for OpenAI?
I think the 1.0 version of the open source AI definition is already available on the OSI website, but I think everyone is kind of agreeing that it might not be the last version of the open source AI definition, just because how the space has been evolving and how people's understandings and where they converge on how to handle all this. There have been like long, heated debates on occasions in terms of what to do with the training data, especially. I think that was one of the biggest I don't know, controversy, debate. I don't know what the best word is, but like you must share the data, but you can't always share the data. What about, privacy and personal information and all those kind of things? And it really feels like that this is a space that should be evolving even down to the level of definitions, because at least personally, I'm not sure we have enough understanding to say that this is something so firm that it's going to hold up for the next, I don't know, 30 years, 50, 100, forever.
I definitely think legislation is going to come into play. The question is, will the genie be out of the bottle, that the world will just have moved forward and tried to chart its own path in the absence of legislation? Because that takes time to develop. It takes time for elected representatives to understand the space, to figure out how to draft laws around that space, and then to implement it and enforce it. That then gives rise to case law, because there's going to subsequently be litigation over that legislation that will further refine and develop our understanding of that. So we're not going to have answers on this for some time, I think. But that's the interesting times we live in. And that's one of the really fun parts about working in both intellectual property and even open source specifically, that it's always changing, it's always evolving, and there's always something new to learn.
Yeah, I mean, I see this change as being substantial. I mean, I have to imagine that being a lawyer with that experience of tech and open source, because open source is playing a relatively large part in the discussion around AI. I mean, we have legislation that's calling out open source, and that's part of the problem, is nobody can define what open source AI is, and yet we have legislation that references it. We're all like, what does that mean? But this is, I mean, it must be an exciting time to be a lawyer with that background in open source and technology and software, because we are, you are one of those that are feeling your way in the dark, right? This is brand new space. What are we going to do with this thing?
Absolutely. It's very much like the early days when people were trying to figure out what the open source definition was going to be. And I'm sure there were very heated debates about that. I wasn't in those rooms at the time, but it certainly is something that is settled now, but it was by no means settled 30 years ago.
Exactly. Fun times.
Yeah, and I know that there were iterations of the open source definition itself as well. And yeah, the AI one is just even more complex than that one.